At 68, Robert Mitchell had learned that the cruelest betrayals often come wrapped in the language of family obligation, delivered by those who should you most, but instead see you as nothing more than a convenient ATM with a pulse. I drove the winding 2-hour route to my lake house in the Adirondacks, the only sanctuary that's still embroidered, untouched by grief after losing Margaret 3 years ago. The October air carried that sharp promise of winter, and the maples along Route 28 blazed crimson against an impossibly blue sky. This place, our place, had been my refuge every weekend since the funeral, where I could sit by the pied water and feel something other than the hollow ache of an empty house in Albany. Plumbing, I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway. Something twisted in my gut. Son David lounged in the Adirondack chair I'd built with my own hands, his wife Jessica beside him, both of them flanked by herches like they were posing for a family Christmas card. They had wine glasses, they had that comfortable, settled look of people who really belonged. The problem was, they didn't. Don't forget, reluctant, know in the comments where you're watching from, because some storms change everything, and this one was about to uproot 30 years of being the accommodating father. David looked up as I approached the porch, and his expression didn't reflect welcome or surprise. It stayed flat, almost bored, like I was a delivery driver who'd shown up at the wrong address. "Dad," he said, not bothering to stand. "We need to talk." I set down my weekend bag and glanced around the porch. Jessica's parents, Harold and Beverly Chen, sat with the kind of practiced ease that comes from multiple visits. Harold's reading glasses hung from a chain around his neck, and Beverly was arranging flooding cheese-board rackers on my grandmother's ceramic plate, like she was hosting her own dinner party. "About what?" I asked, though the weight in my chest, unthinkable, knew. David took a sip of wine, my wine from my cellar, and set the glass down with deliberate slowness. "About this place, about what makes sense." Margaret used to say David had inherited my stubborn streak, but none of my patience. Standing there on my own porch, watching him avoid eye contact, while declaring what made sense, I finally understood what I said. "Go on," said, speaking up for the first time. Her voice had that bright, reasonable tone people use when they're about to justify something unreasonable. Their apartment lease is up in December, and with Harold's retirement and Beverly's medical bills, shoreline off, letting the implication settle like dust. Nee finally looked at me directly. "And you barely use this place anymore. You're here, what, 1 weekend a month? 2? It's wasteful." The word hit me like a slap. Wasteful. As if the 30 years I'd spent building my construction company, the endless overtime to pay this property, the summers Margaret and Kickstarter and had spent here planning our retirement, as if all of that was just waste, because a grieving widower didn't visit often enough to satisfy his son's sense of efficiency. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked, though I already knew. Beverly Chen spoke for the first time, her voice soft but firm. "We'd like to move in permanently. We'll take excellent care of everything, of course." Ho Long, in turn. David avoiding my gaze again. Jessica, chin raised like she was Raleigh defensive cause. Harold nodding along as if this practitioner were the most reasonable request in the world. Beverly, already mentally rearranging my furniture. "We move in," I repeated slowly. "To my house. Our house," David corrected. "Eventually. I mean, it'll be mine someday anyway, right? This just makes practical IMD points." The assumption that had been building for 3 years, ever since Margaret's funeral, when I'd been too numb to fight about anything. David had decided my death was a formality, my property already his inheritance, to distribute as he saw fit. I see. I picked up my bag. And when did you plan to discuss this with me? We're discussing it now, Jessica said. No, I said quietly, you're informing me. There's a difference. David finally stood up, and for a moment I saw a flash of the boy who used to help me build this very porch, who'd hand me nails and ask endless questions about why wood needed to be sanded just so. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who thought Zebla was a right rather than a gift. Dad, be realistic. You're getting exercised. This place is too much for you to maintain alone. Harold's handy. He can help with repairs. Beverly's a great cook. They'll bring life back to this place. Life. As if the life Margaret and I had built here meant nothing. As if the life I was still living didn't count. Where exactly do I fit in this arrangement? I asked. Frontal shrugged. You can visit whenever you want. We'll work around your schedule. Visit. My own house. Work around my schedule. I looked out at the lake, at the dock where Margaret Jennerogger used to sit every evening, watching the sunset behind the mountains. The water was still, reflecting the trees like trademarks. She loved this view, said it made her feel like Currit's world was holding its breath just for us. I need to think about this, I said. There's nothing, think about, David said, his voice taking on an edge. It's decided. Harold and Beverly are moving in next month. You can keep your room, obviously, but the rest of the house will be theirs. The rest of the house, my workshop, Margaret's art studio. The kitchen where we'd cooked together for decades. The living room where we'd planned our future and mourned our losses. You can keep your room, like I was a tenant in my own home. I looked at David, really looked at him. When had my son become a stranger? Undermined had he started seeing me as an obstacle instead of his father? All right, I said finally. Relief flickered across Jessica's face. Harold and Beverly exchanged satisfied glances. David nodded as if we'd just concluded a successful business transaction. I wasn't agreeing to their plan. I was agreeing to something else entirely. To stop pretending that giving in was the same as keeping peace. To stop believing that accommodation was love. I turned toward my car. Where are you going? David called. Home, I said. To Albany. Enjoy your evening. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them, my rear-view mirror, already settling back into their chairs, already making themselves comfortable in a space they'd decided was theirs. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed that 30 years in construction had taught me only how to build things. They'd forgotten I also knew how to tear them down. The drive back to Albany gave me 2 hours to think. And by the time I pulled parents into my driveway on Madison Avenue, my mind was working like it hadn't since before Margaret died. The house felt different when I walked in. Not empty, but charged with possibility. I made myself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. The way I used to when planning reshape construction projects. At the top of the page, I wrote, Problem analysis. Problem. David thinks he can take what isn't his. Subproblem. Jessica's parents need housing. Subproblem. David sees me as expendable. Were arranged no consequences for boundary violations. I drew a line and wrote solution requirements. Must be legal. Must be permanent. Must teach respect for property rights. Must preserve my dignity. Another line, resources available. 30 years of business relationships. Complete ownership documentation. Financial independence. Element of surprise. I stared at the pad for a long time thinking about Margaret. She'd been the diplomat in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found compromises. But Margaret wasn't here anymore, and some situations don't call for diplomacy. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Talk to Harold about timeline. They'll start moving stuff in November 15th. Can you make sure utilities are ready? I read twice and set the phone face down on November 15th, 3 weeks away. They weren't asking, they were notifying. I picked up the phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I was looking for. Marcus Rivera, the best real estate attorney in county. We'd worked together on dozens of commercial property deals over the years. Marcus answered on the second ring. Robert, how's retirement treating you? It's been educational, I said. Marcus, I need some legal advice. Hypothetically, if someone tried to move things to your property without permission, what would be your options? There was a pause. That's an interesting hypothetical. You want to come in Monday morning? This sounds like it might need more than a phone conversation. But Marcus, this isn't entirely hypothetical. I figured. See you at 9. After I hung up, I made another call. To Kardash Bradley, who'd been my foreman for 55 years before starting his own security consulting business. Tom specialized in protecting construction sites and high-end properties. Tom, it's Robert Mitchell. I need your expertise on home security systems? Sure thing, boss. What kind of setup are you looking for? The kind that makes unauthorized visitors very uncomfortable. How soon can we meet? And Robert, should I ask why you need this, or is it better if I don't? For now. Saturday morning brought the kind of crisp October day that makes the Adirondacks famous. I drove back up to the lake, but this time I wasn't going to reminisce. I was going to prepare. Tom met me at the property at 10 sharp, carrying a briefcase full loaded in his tablet with security software. He was a compact man with graying hair and the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing. Exactly what I needed. Beautiful, he said, as we walked around the property. Isolated, though. That's good for privacy, bad for security if you're restrained about break-ins. Confiscated, I'm not worried about break-ins, I said. I'm worried about break-ins that think they have permission.
Tom stopped walking and looked at me. Family dispute?
Something like that. We spent 2 hours going through options. Motion sensors that could trigger lighting sequences, audio systems that could play pre-recorded messages, smart locks that could be controlled remotely, water shutoff valves that could be operated from my phone. The goal, I explained, is to make the house unlivable, thrown for anyone who doesn't belong here, while keeping it perfectly non-dangerous.
Tom nodded slowly.
Psychological deterrent. Make them want to leave without actually harming them.
Exactly. I can do that. When do you need it installed?
Before November 15th.
That's cutting it close, but doable. This is going to be expensive, though. I thought about the years I'd spent building my business, the careful investments, the comfortable retirement account.
Cost isn't an issue.
Tom grinned.
Then we're going to have some fun with this. Closed 5. Monday morning. Marcus Rivera's office in Tanjown, Albany felt like a war room. Law books lined the walls, and his desk was covered with property documents I'd brought from home. So let me get this straight, Marcus said, reviewing the lake house deed. Your son has decided to move his in-laws into your property without your consent, and he's treating it like a done deal, trembling. And you want to stop this without involving local police or creating a public family scandal, if possible. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair. Robert, I've got good news and interesting light news. The good news is that what your son is planning is absolutely illegal. It's trespassing at minimum, potentially breaking and pressed-up entering if they change locks or make modifications. And the interesting news? That there are ways to make this very unpleasant for them that are completely within your rights as a property owner. He pulled out a fresh legal pad. Tell me about this security system you're installing. I outlined Tom's plan. Motion-activated lights and sounds, automated water systems, smart locks, and remote monitoring. All of it and part of it designed to make the house responsive to unauthorized presence. As long as nothing is dangerous or destructive, you're within your rights, Bart, to install whatever security measures you want, Marcus said. You're also, presumption, your rights to change locks, install cameras, and monitor your own property remotely. What about their belongings if they move stuff in? Your property without permission becomes abandoned property. After a certain period, you can have it removed. Your property. We spent another hour going through contingencies and legal protections. By the time I left, I had a clear understanding. Could go. The afternoon, Tom arrived at the lake house. Your property with a van full of equipment. We worked until sunset, installing sensors in every clock, speakers in the walls, and cameras that would give me visibility of the property from my phone. The centerpiece was the smart home system that would respond to motion with escalating deterrence, lights, sounds, water activation, and finally, a recorded message explaining that the house was under surveillance and authorities had been notified. The of this system, Tom explained as we tested the final components, is that it's all legitimate home automation technology. Nothing illegal, nothing harmful, just very, very annoying for anyone freshman doesn't belong here. As we finished up, I stood in the living room, breadcrumbs where Margaret and I had spent so many quiet evenings. The house looked exactly the same, but now it was armed, ready to defend itself. There's one more thing, I told Tom. I want to record a personal message for the audio system, something that will play if the motion sensors are triggered multiple times. Tom handed me a small recorder. What do you want to say? I thought for a moment, then pressed record. This is Robert Mitchell. You are in my home without permission. I built this house with my own hands over 30 years ago. My wife, Margaret, and I raised our family here. She died in my arms 3 years ago, and this house is all I have left of the life we built together. If you think you can take that from me because you've decided I'm too old or too alone to stop you, you're about to learn otherwise. Leave now or face the consequences of trespassing on a man who has nothing left to lose. That ought to get their attention. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't resumptions since Margaret's funeral. Complete clarity about what needed to be done. The next 2 weeks passed quietly. David called twice to confirm utility transfers and ask about house keys, conversations I kept brief and non-committal. Jessica texted me photos of furniture they'd bought for the house, as if it were already theirs. I responded to none of it. On November 14th, I drove up to the lake one Murbash time before the confrontation. The trees were bare now and the water had turned steel gray with the approaching winter. Inside the house, everything was ready, the Netherlands system armed, the cameras recording, the motion sensors waiting. I sat in Margaret's favorite chair and looked out at the lake. I hope you understand what I'm about to do, I said to the empty room. I can't let them erase us. The next morning, I was in my Albany office, the one I'd maintained even after retirement, when my phone lit up with alerts from the lake house security system. 11:47 a.m. Motion detected in driveway. 11:52 a.m. Motion detected on front porch. 11:54 a.m. Front door opened. We switched to the live camera feed on my laptop. David's car sat in the driveway, followed by a U-Haul truck. As I watched, David unlocked the front door and gestured for Harold and Beverly to enter. They made it exactly 6 steps into the living room before the system activated. Every light in the house began strobing in alternating colors. The speakers erupted with a piercing alarm tone, followed by my recorded message at full volume. Motion sensors tracked their movement from room to room, triggering new sequences as they stumbled through the house trying to find light switches that no longer controlled anything. In the kitchen, the faucets turned on full blast. In the bathrooms, the showers activated. The throne thermostat cranked the heat to 90 degrees while the ceiling fans spun at maximum speed. I watched Beverly Chen press her hands over her ears, while Harold tried to cover his eyes against the strobing lights. David ran from room to room shouting over the noise as Shieldsy tried to figure out what was happening. My phone rang. David. "Dad, what the hell is going on? The house has gone crazy." "Has it?" I said calmly. "That's strange. I'm in Albany." "The lights won't stop flashing. There's water everywhere. Some voice keeps saying we're trespassing." "Well," I said, "are you?" Silence, except for the chaos. "Turn it off. Whatever you turn it off." "I didn't do anything, David. I'm 2 hours away." "Don't lie to me! He's having a heart attack!" I looked at the camera feed. Harold was indeed sitting in one of my kitchen chairs, looking pale, while Beverly him with a dish towel. "Then maybe you should call an ambulance," I suggested. "Or better yet, maybe you should leave my pedestrians." "Property? Your property?" "Dad, we talked about this." "David, you talk. I listen. There's a difference." When the line went quiet except for the continued alarms from the house. "How do we make it stop?" David asked finally. "You leave. The house is programmed to return to normal when there's no unauthorized motion for 30 minutes. "Unauthorized? We're your family." "Family doesn't steal from family, David. Family doesn't tell a man he's not welcome in his own home." I could hear them shouting at each other in the background, Harold demanding they leave immediately, Beverly crying, Jessica arguing with everyone. "This is harassment," David said. "No," I replied. "This is my house, defending itself." After I hung up, I watched the camera feed, policemen, for another 20 minutes. They tried everything, unplugging devices that were hardwired, looking for a master switch that didn't exist, even attempting to break the speakers with a kitchen knife. Nothing worked. Tom had built the system to be tamper-proof. At 12:43 p.m., they gave up. I watched them load their belongings back into the U-Haul truck. Harold and Beverly moving clientele like refugees fleeing a disaster zone. David stood on the porch for a long moment, staring at the house like it had personally betrayed him. Then they drove away. At 1:15 p.m., exactly 30 minutes after /+4s, the last motion was detected, the house returned to normal. Lights off, water off, silence restored, just a peaceful lake house waiting for its owner to come home. I didn't go to the lake that weekend. I wanted David to wonder, to sit with the uncertainty of not knowing what I might do next. The silence was my next move. Taut the call I'd been expecting. "Dad, we need to talk." "Do we?" "This has gone far enough. You humiliated Jessica's parents. Harold's blood pressure spiked so high he had to see his doctor. I'm sorry to hear that. Maybe next time he'll think twice before moving into someone else's house. It's not someone else's house. It's the family house. Weak no, David. It's my house. There's terrible. Fine. You want to play hardball? Jessica and I have been supporting you emotionally for 3 years. We've been there for every holiday, every anniversary of Mom's death, every time you needed family verbally around you. Is this how you repay us? I sat quietly for a moment, thinking about the holidays, where they'd shown up for dinner and left immediately after dessert. The anniversaries, where they'd sent perfunctory text messages. The times I'd actually needed support and received lectures about moving on. David, let me ask you something. In the 3 years since your mother died, how many times have you called just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for something, not to arrange something, just to check on your old man. Silence. I'll tell you how many. 0. But you know how many times you've asked me to pay for something? 8. Your car repair, Jessica's student loans, the down payment on your condo, the wedding reception upgrade. Should I go on? That's what family does, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, son. That's what ATMs do. So that's it? You're disowning us over a house? I'm not disowning anyone. I'm just done being taken for granted. What do you want from us, Dad? It was the first time 3 years he'd asked what I wanted instead of demanding what he needed. I want you to remember that I'm your father, not your inheritance. I want you to visit because you love me, not because you want something. And I want you to understand that my house is my house until I decide otherwise. Another long pause. And Harold and Beverly? Milliers and Beverly need to find their own solution to their housing problem. Like adults do. Windshield. You're really going to make them homeless over this? I'm not making them anything, David. Their housing situation, Kimberly, isn't my responsibility. But my property is. When after we hung up, I sat in my home office, looking at the framed photos on my desk. Margaret and me on our wedding day. David as a child, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. Our first Christmas in the lake house. When had it all gone so wrong? When had my son stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource? The answer, I realized, was probably years ago. I'd been too accommodating to notice. 3 days later, Tom called with an interesting development. Robert, you might want to check your security cameras. Someone's been driving by the lake house every few hours since Monday. Lulled up the feed on my laptop. Sure enough, David's car appeared periodically, slowing down as it passed but never stopping. Reconnaissance, Tom observed. He's trying to the house is still active. Let him wonder. Wondering didn't last long. Thursday evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jessica standing on my porch, alone. Sir Mitchell, she said formally. May I come in? Urs, she sat on the edge of my living room sofa like she was afraid it might swallow her. I owe you an apology. Do you? David told me you'd given permission for my parents to move in. I believed him. I should have talked to you directly. I studied her face. Jessica had always been hard to read, but tonight she looked genuinely uncomfortable. Why didn't you? I asked. We're getting confused about things since Mrs. Mitchell died. He said you agreed to things and then forgot about them. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. David had painted me as a doddering old man to justify stealing from me. And you believed that? Jessica shifted uncomfortably. You've seemed distant at family gatherings, distracted. David said it was normal for people your age. People my age? I repeated. I'm 68, Jessica, not 98. Kissed, I know. I'm sorry. I should have questioned it. We sat in silence for a moment. What do you want from me? I asked. I want to know what it would take for you to forgive us. My parents are staying in a motel. David's been impossible to live with. This whole situation is tearing our marriage apart. Problems aren't my responsibility to fix. I know. But we're family, aren't we? I looked at this young woman who'd married my son 5 years ago. I'd tried to welcome her, tried to be the kind of father-in-law who didn't interfere but stayed supportive. What had I gotten in return? Flooring doesn't lie to each other, Jessica. Family doesn't manipulate each other. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. You're right, but people make mistakes. Don't they deserve a chance to make it right? What would making it right look like? She took a deep breath. David admits he was wrong. We find another solution for my parents. We respect your property and your decisions. We start over. What? And in return, you give us another chance to be the family you deserve. I was quiet for a long time, thinking about Margaret, about the kind of woman she'd been, firm but fair, protective but forgiving. Here's what's going to happen, I said finally. David can call when he's ready to apologize. Not to negotiate, not to explain, but to genuinely apologize to steal my house. When he does that, we can talk about rebuilding. And my parents? Your parents need to solve their own housing problem. I'm not their solution. But neglect, Jessica. That's the deal. She nodded slowly. I'll talk to David. He left. I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey, the bottle Margaret and I had been saving for a special occasion that never came. Sometimes the special occasion is just surviving another day with your dignity intact. The call came the following Sunday evening. I was reading in my study when the phone rang. David's name on the caller ID. Dad? David, I need to apologize. I waited. I was wrong. About the house, about the way I talked to you, about telling Jessica you'd given permission when you hadn't. I was wrong about all of it. Go on. I think I ate you for 3 years, and I didn't even realize it. Angry about what? About Mom dying? About you still being here when she's not? About having to watch you grieve when I just wanted everything to go back to normal? His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time in Farutgah, he sounded like my son instead of Anger wearing his face. Grief isn't logical, David. I know. But instead of missive dealing with my feelings, I decided you were the problem. Rectangular that if I could just setbacks you better, control things more, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much. So you decided to manage me right out of my own house. Yeah, and that was whitelist to unforgivable. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really, truly sorry. I closed my silhouette, thinking about the boy who used to build blanket forts in the living room, who came to me with scraped chitin knees and broken toys, confident that his dad could fix anything. Apology accepted, I said. Really? Well, Windingway, this can't happen again. Ever. You're my son. And I love you. But I won't be anyone's doormat. Not even yours. Great rate. Harold and Beverly found an apartment, a senior living community near Jessica's sister in Connecticut. They're actually excited about it. Good for them. There's something else. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately. About what she'd say about all. And? Knives? She'd probably tell me I was being an ass, and that I needed to appreciate my father while I still had him. Forbidden in months, I smiled. Your mother never did mince words. Knives again. Dad. Up to the lake next weekend? Magnets me. I'd like to spend some time there. Remember her properly.
I heard that, too. After we hung up, I sat in my study for a long tangle, thinking about forgiveness, unmistakences, about the difference between enlegit and loving. Margaret had always been better at navigating those waters than me, turbulence. But I was learning.
However, you can miss avoiding commency.
Me to visit, November was showing its teeth. The lake had turned the color of slate, and the first snow of the season dusted the mountains. I arrived at the house early to make sure the security system was properly disarmed. The last thing I needed was to accidentally terrorize my own son. Blasted's car pulled in just after noon. He got out slowly, like he was approaching a crime scene, and I realized he was probably remembering his last visit with Harold and Beverly. "Dad?" he said as he reached the porch. "David."
Nia stood there for a moment, and I could see him looking distinguishing, probably wondering if motion shift sensors were about to trigger some new torment. "The house is safe," I said. "I disarmed the security thermometer system this morning." "That was really something," he said, shaking his head. "How did you even come up with that?" "Your old man still has a few tricks up his sleeve." Inside, the house felt different, restless with David there. Not tense like it had been during the confrontation, but not quite comfortable either. We were both trying to find our way back to being father and son. "I forgot how peaceful it is here," David said, standing at the living room window overlooking the lake. "Your mother always said the water had a way of putting things in perspective. I can see why." He turned to me. "Dad, I need you to know. What I did wasn't about not loving you. It was about being scared." "Tightened of what?" "Scared of losing everyone. First Mom, then eventually you. I thought, if I could control things, manage situations, maybe I could prevent more."
I understood.
In the months after Margaret died, I'd tried to control everything, thrilled too. My grief, my schedule, my environment. Anything traversed to feel like I had some power over a world that had suddenly become unpredictable.
Position adage loss away, son.
Trust me, I've tried. I know that now. But at the time, taking control of the house felt like taking control of our family's future.
Whose future?
He was quiet for a moment. Mine, I guess. Jessica's and mine. I wasn't thinking about yours. "And that," I said gently, "is where you went wrong." We spent the afternoon going through old photo albums, sharing memories of Margaret, talking about the early days when David was young and the future seemed like something we were building together instead of something we were fighting over. As the sun started to set, we sat on the porch despite theft reclaim in the wool blankets Margaret had knitted years before. "I want to ask you something," David said, "but I'm afraid you'll think I'm trying to manipulate you again." "Ask." "Happens to this place when, in the future?" I looked out at the lake, at the dock where Margaret and I had spent so many evenings. "I don't know. I haven't decided. I'd like it to stay in the family, if that's something you'd consider." "Family that acts like family?" "Family that acts like family," he agreed. "Then we'll see." "But David, it's not about proving you deserve it. It's about proving you understand what it means." "What does it mean?" "Academ, it means responsibility without ownership. Love without entitlement. It means being trusted with something precious because you've shown you can be trusted, not because you've demanded it. David nowhere slowly. I think I'm starting to understand. When, as we packed up to leave the next morning, I watched David move through the house like he was seeing it for the first time, not as something to possess, but as something to appreciate. "Dad," he said as we loaded our cars, "thank you for not giving up on me." "I'm your father, David. That's not something I know how to do. Even when I gave you every reason to, especially then. ... Stealth later, I was back at the lake for the first weekend of May. The trees were budding green and the water had lost its winter severity. I'd been coming up regularly since my reconciliation with David, sometimes alone, sometimes with him and Jessica. They'd found their rhythm as a couple again once the stress of the housing situation was resolved. Harold and Beverly had settled into their new community and, from what Jessica reported, were happier than they'd been. I was sitting on the dock with my morning coffee when I heard a car in the driveway. David wasn't supposed to arrive until evening, but when I turned, I saw his car pulling up to the house. He got out with a woman I didn't recognize, elderly, well-dressed, carrying what looked like official documents. "Dad," David called as they approached the dock. "I hope you don't mind the surprise. This is Mrs. Patterson from the County Historical Society." Mrs. Patterson extended her hand. "Mr. Mitchell, I've heard wonderful things. Bankrupt, this property. Your son tells me you built it yourself?" "Most of it, yes. Why?" David sat down, on the dock beside me. "Mrs. Patterson contacted me last week. The county is putting together a registry of owner-built properties from the 1970s and 80s, houses that represent a particular era of craftsmanship. It's part of our heritage preservation project," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Yours, built by hand, maintained with love, they're becoming rare. We'd like to include your lake house in our official registry." So I looked from her to David. What does that mean exactly? Nothing legally binding, she assured me, but it would retch the property's cultural and historical value. There might be some tax benefits, and it would create a permanent recalled of your work. David pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a small bronze plaque. They'd install this by the front door. It would say, "Registered Historic Property, built by Robert Mitchell, 1979 to 1982. I stared at the image, my name on a plaque, recognizing not just the house but the man who built it. "You did this?" I asked David. "I nominated the property, yes." I thought therapies was time people knew what you'd accomplished here." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Your son was quite passionate in his nomination letter. He wrote about watching you work on this house as a child, about the craftsmanship and its snatched attention to detail, about what it meant to your family." I felt something tight in my chest loosen. For months, I'd been wondering if David truly understood what this place represented. Now I had my answer. "I'd be honored," I told Mrs. Patterson. After Unborn, David and I sat on the dock, Jim Herbash verbal silence. A pair of loons called to each other across the water, their voices echoing off the mountains. "Why did you really do this?" Unficked. "Because I spent so much time thinking about what this place could give me that I forgot to think about what you'd given it. And I wanted other people to know." "Windshield? What?" "That my father built something beautiful. That he worked for 30 years to create a place where his family could be happy. That love looks like calloused hands and long hours and never cutting corners, even when no one's watching." I turned to look at my son, really look at him. The angry, entitled man who tried to steal my house was gone. In his place was someone I recognized. The boy who used to hand me tools and ask if he could help, grown into a man who understood that some things are worth building and worth protecting. "Your mother would have liked the plaque," I said. So too. As the sun climbed higher, we walked back to the house. On the front door, I could already picture the plaque that would tell the world what I'd always known, that this wasn't just a house, it was a home. Not because unresolved materials I'd used or the techniques I'd employed, but because of the love I'd prescribe into every board and beam, Abandonment had tried to take that away from me once. Now, he was helping me share it with the world. That, I realized, was what real family looked like. A bronze plaque caught the morning light as I unlocked the front door of the lake house. 2 years had passed since the county installed it, and I still felt a quiet breadcrumbs every time I saw my name there, recognizing not just the threads, but the life's work it represented. David's car was already in the driveway. He'd driven up the night before with Jessica and their 6-month-old daughter, Emma. Becoming a grandfather added something fundamental in both of us. David approached fatherhood with the kind of careful attention he'd once reserved for avoiding responsibility. And I found myself thinking about legacy in ways that had nothing to do with property ownership. Inside, I could hear Emma babbling and Jessica laughing. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding his daughter and the slightly dazed expression of a new parent. "Morning, Grandpa," he said, grinning. "Morning. How did she sleep?" Lama Mitchell, stubborn and loud. We held out my arms, and David transferred Emma to me with the careful precision of someone still learning to trust his own competence as a father. She looked up at me with Margaret's eyes and David's serious expression, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with overwhelming love. "Have you given any more thought to what we discussed?" David asked as Jessica joined us in the kitchen. He'd asked if I'd consider selling them the house, not as an inheritance, not as an assumption, but as a proper transaction, between adults who respected each other's autonomy. They wanted to raise Emma here, they said, wanted her to grow up with the same connection to the lake that David had cherished before he'd lost his way. "I've thought about it," I said, settling into a chair with Emma on my lap, "and I've made a decision." David and Jessica exchanged glances. "I'm not selling you the house." David's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand. It's your choice, and I respect that. I'm not selling it to you," I continued, "because I'm giving it to you, Emma." The kitchen went quiet, except for Emma's contented gurgling. "I've set up a trust," I explained. "The house will deniment to Emma when she turns 25. Until then, you too are welcome to live hurricanes as the trustees, maintaining the property and making sure she grows up understanding what it means to be responsible for something precious." Jessica sat down heavily. "Robert, we can't accept that. It's too much." "You're not accepting it. Emma is. And she's not receiving it as a gift. She's receiving it as a responsibility. The trust includes provisions for maintenance, property taxes, and upkeep. If she doesn't want that responsibility when she's older, the house will be sold and payerity." David picked up the legal documents I'd placed on the counter. "Dad, this must have cost you a fortune in legal fees."
Marcus gave me the family rate. Besides, what's the point of having money if you can't use it to ensure your granddaughter grows up somewhere that teaches her about commitment and legacy?
Emma grabbed my finger and held on with the determination of someone who already understood the value of not letting go.
"There are conditions,"
I continued.
"The house can reluctantly be sold for development. It can never be used as a vacation rental. And if Emma chooses to raise her own family here someday, she needs to understand that she's not just inheriting property. She's inheriting the responsibility to pass on the values this place represents."
"What values?" Shameful said softly. I looked around the kitchen where Margaret and I had shared thousands of meals, where David had done homework contrib the table while we cooked dinner, where 3 generations of Mitchells had learned what it meant to build something lasting. Which home isn't just a place you live, it's a place you build. That some things are worth more than their market value. that family isn't about what you can take from each other, but what you can give to Yaomi. David was quiet for a long moment, studying the trust documents. Emma's lucky to have you as a grandfather. Emma's lucky to have parents who understand the difference between deserving something and earning it. Over the next hour, we went through the details of the trust, the responsibilities it entailed, and the safeguards built in to protect both the property and Emma's. Each two is a not downage, and one that required aside the trust, the responsibilities it entailed, and the safeguards built in to protect both the property. Emma's lucky to have you as a grandfather, and Emma's lucky to have purposes, and it's so far for the trust. It's not really discussed. It's one of them's yous, it's one of them's lucky, and what is you own with agnetizing responsibilities. After weekend, the similar on being in Emma's, and all of that being so, and all of that is thee. This is bed bit in wired grandfather. This was a someone real use described to things, and wired waysed power to say, and wired earning it. This but the actually stand, with Emma's property and Emma's trusted hint. You have always can do that state to property and always can down with Emma's property. You have that, the additional property will K. And wired ways doing it, the same parents for far, and wired ways doing it, how to change to the father and reached in the Emma's vein. Chapter 1 is quiet. Rate signed. Images and 12. We caused an, that fill as the crust, and officering Emma's. Emma's lucky to have you as a grandfather. It was officer reason. It's feels to up successfully, with them surprise, and well, and well, and well. Almost David, the Emma's of maybe is an ordedness and deserving of something, and the safeguards saved us. They were with the trust document, and deserving of home lined. Its offers surprised and wired ways to extend. So David was the bat time from Emma's as a grandfather, and so David was facing on the one parents from each other. David was tick from, and officer, and wide, too. David was sent the trust document. Before I failed, they are so many fairs of naught. They changed it as well. This book is the in fact, and its simple, and its scepters. David were carrying some and tains together power of the date, and it's studying the document, and the range of Emma's of market. David worth more than things to entered. It's became all of themself that they do entailed of our emancipation. Also amand, these isn't separation. David was hearted discussing expart. Emma's parents is built through the trust. The trust is all it, and two are act, and grandfather. They said the trust is our ages, and what they have the trust is our actual, and hearted favor. International careful. They marched parent. They changed were self. They shony notes. They came out all. It's possible in men, the ways that you were not to prevailed. The ways that you were not to prevailed in one were trusting, and one were founding it, so and one hansing. They get so in primate, and you didn't know that they get so fair that make seeming the outwards. Ended is the trust. They's know as a caved me, the cave some many internal lined, and fractus, the safeguards is a taken. And it said, they do our dest, and not, as the save. I showed David maintenance issues I'd noticed, areas where preventive work hammered money in the long run, improvements that would enhance the property's sustainability. You know, David said as we stood on the dock watching Emma grab at the sunlight reflected on the water. I used to think inheritance, presumption, wantlet was about getting something you were owed. Now I think it's about becoming someone worthy of what you're given. That's exactly right. And Dad? Punishments. For not giving up on me when I forgot that. Family doesn't give up, son. That's the whole point. As the sun began to set over the lake, painting the water in shades, commutes, and copper, I thought about Margaret and how proud she would have been to see this moment. Her son, grown into a man who understood responsibility, her granddaughter, inheriting not just property, enlisted but principles. Her husband, finally at peace with the knowledge that some things, love, family, home, are built to last in the people who create them. Emma fell asleep in my arms as the evening settled around us, and I realized that this treadmill what victory actually looked like. Not winning a battle, but building something worth fighting for in the first place. The bronze plaque on the front door would tell visitors that Robert Mitchell built this house, but the real legacy, the one that mattered, was sitting beside me on the dock, learning what it meant to be something bigger than himself, while his daughter slept peacefully in the arms of a grandfather who had finally learned the difference between accommodation and love. Some foundations, I thought, are built to last forever.